Every single one of them ran. On the worst night of their lives, when the torches came up through the olive trees and the soldiers closed in around the man they had followed for 3 years, the men who had sworn they would die for him scattered into the dark like startled birds. Peter ran. John ran. Every last one of them ran. One of them was so desperate to get away that he tore out of the hands grabbing him and left his own clothing behind and ran naked into the night rather than be caught standing next to Jesus. Hold that picture. Hold it tight, because you're going to need it later. Now jump forward. 30 years, 40 years, the very same men. And not one of them is running anymore. One of them is hanging on a cross in Rome, and he has begged to be nailed up upside down because he does not believe he deserves to die the same way his master did. One of them is in southern India with a spear going into his side. One of them is in Armenia, and the soldiers are using knives. And what they are doing to him is so horrifying that for 2,000 years, artists have refused to look away from it. One of them is standing in front of a king who can end his life with a single word. And the king is waiting. And all the apostle has to do, all he has to do, is take it back. He does not take it back. None of them take it back. This is the thing you have to sit with before we go one step further. These are the same men, the same cowards from the garden, the same fishermen who hid behind a locked door because they were terrified the authorities were coming for them next. Something happened to those men. Something turned a room full of people who ran from a few soldiers in the dark into a movement of people who walked toward lions, toward crosses, toward fire, and did not flinch. And here's the part nobody tells you. Almost every one of them could have lived. That is the detail that should keep you up tonight. In nearly every case, all the apostle had to do was say a few words, 3 words sometimes. Curse the name. Deny the resurrection. Drop a pinch of incense on an altar to Caesar and call him Lord. The Romans were not asking for much. They were practical people. They did not want a pile of bodies. They wanted obedience. Say the words, and you walk home to your family. Not one of the 11 said the words. So this is not a story about how 12 men died. This is not a story about Roman cruelty. This is not a story about ancient history that has nothing to do with you. This is a story about 12 ordinary men, fishermen, a tax collector, a political radical, who were each handed a single sentence that would have saved their lives, and who looked their executioners in the eye and refused to say it. There is a Greek word at the center of this whole story, and once you hear it, you will never read the Bible the same way again. The word is martes. It simply means witness, a witness, someone who saw something and tells the truth about what they saw. That is all the apostles ever claimed to be. We saw him die. We saw him alive again. We are witnesses. But within 100 years, that one Greek word, martes, had changed its meaning entirely. It stopped meaning witness. It started meaning the thing we still mean today, martyr. Because so many of the people who told the truth about what they saw ended up dead for it. The word for witness and the word for someone who dies for the truth became the same word. Stay with me, because we are going to walk through all of them, one by one. And I'm going to be honest with you the whole way, because you deserve honesty. more than you deserve a good story. Only one of these men's martyrdoms is actually recorded in the Bible itself. One. Everything else comes from history outside the pages of Scripture. From the Roman historian Tacitus, from the Jewish historian Josephus, from the early church historian Eusebius, from men like Tertullian and Hegesippus, who wrote it all down a few generations later. Some of it is rock solid, some of it is tradition that we cannot prove. I will tell you which is which every single time. That is a promise. And there is one more thing I need you to carry with you all the way to the end. Out of these 12 men, 11 were executed. But there is a death in this story that is not really a death at all. One of them, the youngest, the one who outlived all the others, was not killed. He was the last man standing. An old man on a lonely island, decades after all his friends were in the ground. We will get to him last. We will get to that island. But not yet. But before any of them died for the truth, you have to meet the one who died running from it. Because there were not 11 men at that Last Supper, there were 12. And the 12th was named Judas. You know what Judas did. He sold the location of his friend for 30 pieces of silver, the price, in that culture, of a slave. He led the soldiers through the dark to the one face in the crowd he knew best, and he marked Jesus with a kiss. A kiss. The most intimate sign of friendship turned into a weapon. And then the Bible does something it almost never does. It shows you the death of an apostle in real time. Judas, the accounts say, was so destroyed by what he had done that he threw the silver back into the temple, walked out, and hanged himself. The book of Acts adds a gruesome second detail, that his body fell and burst open in a field that the people of Jerusalem renamed the Field of Blood. Here's why I'm telling you this first, before any of the martyrs. Judas is the proof of the whole thing. Judas is the control group, because Judas is the one apostle who, when the pressure came, took it back. He saw the same miracles, he heard the same teaching, he sat at the same table, and when the moment came that cost him something, he broke. And the breaking destroyed him. Judas shows you exactly what it looks like when one of the 12 cracks, which means that for every other apostle who did not crack, who chose the spear, the cross, the knife over the easy way out, you are watching a free human being make a different choice than Judas made. 11 men looked at the road Judas took and walked the other way, every single one of them, knowing where the other road led. The 11 needed to become 12 again. So the survivors gathered, prayed, and chose a man named Matthias to take the empty chair. A man who had been with them from the beginning, who had seen the risen Jesus with his own eyes, and who now stepped into a seat that everyone in the room knew was a death sentence. Think about the courage of that. Matthias volunteered for an office whose previous holder had hanged himself and whose colleagues were already being hunted. The tradition says Matthias carried the gospel north and was stoned and then beheaded for it. He took the chair anyway. Now let us start with the only martyrdom the Bible actually shows you. His name was James. Not the famous James. There are several in this story, and that is going to matter, so pay attention. This is James, the son of Zebedee. Big personality, big temper. Jesus had nicknamed him and his brother John the sons of thunder, and you do not earn a nickname like that by being quiet. James and John were the two who once asked if they could call down fire from heaven to burn up a village that snubbed them. That is the kind of men we're talking about. Loud, bold, ambitious. Their mother once marched up to Jesus and asked if her two boys could sit at his right and left hand in the kingdom. And James was the first of the 12 to find out exactly what that kind of glory was going to cost. Around the year 44, a king named Herod Agrippa decided that persecuting Christians was good politics. The book of Acts tells you this in one brutal, almost casual sentence. Herod laid hands on certain of the church to harm them, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. That is it. That is the whole report. 2,000 years later, we still feel the cold efficiency of it. No trial worth recording, no long speech. The sword. Done. But the early historian Eusebius preserved a detail that the Bible leaves out, and it is one of the most haunting details in the whole story. Eusebius says that the man who arrested James, the one who brought the accusation against him, stood there and watched James face death without fear, and was so shaken by what he saw, so undone by the courage of this condemned man, that he turned to the soldiers and announced that he too was a Christian. On the way to the execution, the accuser asked James to forgive him, and James, the son of thunder, looked at the man who had just sentenced him to die, paused for a moment and said, "Peace be with you." And then he kissed him, and the two of them were beheaded together. Sit with that. The first apostle to die took someone with him, not into death, but into faith. The first sword that fell created the next believer in the same swing. That was the beginning. It would not be the last time. Now here is what you have to understand about what came next, because it gets darker fast. In the year 64, a fire broke out in Rome and burned for the better part of a week. Whole districts of the city turned to ash, and the emperor, a young, paranoid, increasingly unstable man named Nero, needed someone to blame. He chose the Christians. The Roman historian Tacitus, who was no friend of Christianity at all, wrote it down about 50 years later, and his account is one of the most chilling things to survive from the ancient world. Tacitus says, Nero had Christians arrested, wrapped in animal skins, and torn apart by dogs, nailed to crosses, and this is the part that turns your stomach, covered in pitch and set on fire to light his gardens at night. Human torches to illuminate a party. That is the Rome that two of the most important men in this story walked into. And neither of them walked back out. The first was Peter. You know Peter, loud, impulsive, big-hearted, always speaking before he thought. The one who tried to walk on water and started sinking, the one who swore he would never abandon Jesus, and then, a few hours later, denied even knowing him 3 times, while a girl by a fire watched him do it. That is the Peter, the one who cracked under pressure from a servant girl. So watch what happens to that man. By the time Nero is hunting Christians in Rome, Peter is an old man, and he is the most recognizable leader of this new movement on earth. Tradition, and this is tradition, recorded by Tertullian and Origen and others, not scripture, tells us Peter was arrested and condemned to die the way Rome killed its enemies. Crucifixion. the same death his master died. And here is the detail that is echoed for 2,000 years. Peter asked to be crucified upside down, head toward the earth, because the man who once denied even knowing Jesus could not bear, at the end, to die in the exact same posture as the Lord he had failed. He did not feel worthy of it. Think about that turn. The man whose great sin was cowardice, the man who said, "I do not know him," spent the last breath he had insisting he was not good enough to die like Jesus. The coward became so brave that his only fear left was that his death might look too glorious. In the 1940s, archaeologists digging under the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome found something. Beneath the church, beneath the altar, in a grave that early Christians had marked and venerated, they found the bones of an older man, a man of strong build from the 1st century, and the feet were missing. Some have wondered whether that is exactly what you would expect to find if a body had been taken down from an upside-down cross, where the feet are nailed highest and hardest. We cannot prove those bones are Peter, but the church had marked that spot as his grave for 1,900 years before anyone dug it up. And there he was. Here's what most people miss about Peter. We remember him for the denial, for the failure, for the worst night of his life. But the failure is not the end of his sentence. The man who denied Christ to a servant girl refused to deny him to the emperor of Rome. That is the whole gospel in one human life. You are not your worst night. Brace yourself, because the deaths are about to spread out across the entire known world. Peter had a brother. His name was Andrew, and Andrew was the one who found Jesus first. Before Peter was ever called, it was Andrew who heard about this teacher, went and saw for himself, and then ran to get his brother. Andrew, the quiet one, the one who is always bringing someone else to Jesus. In the Gospels, every single time you see Andrew, he is introducing somebody. He brought Peter. He brought the boy with the loaves and fishes. He is the connector, the one who works in the background. Tradition says Andrew carried the message far north and west, into Greece, into the regions around the Black Sea. And in a city called Patras, the Roman governor had him arrested. The story that has come down to us says Andrew was sentenced to crucifixion, but not on a cross shaped like the one you are picturing. He was bound to a cross shaped like the letter X. To this day, you can find that shape on the flag of Scotland, which claims Andrew as its patron, and they still call it St. Andrew's Cross. The tradition adds something almost unbearable. The soldiers did not nail Andrew. They tied him with ropes. Do you understand why? Nails kill faster. Blood loss, shock. The body gives out. Ropes do not. Ropes mean you hang there, fully conscious for days, dying slowly of exhaustion and thirst under the open sky. The old accounts say Andrew hung on that X-shaped cross for 2 days, and that he spent those 2 days preaching to the crowd that had gathered to watch him die. He would not stop talking about Jesus. Even then, even there, you and I would have stopped. Let us be honest with each other. Most of us would stop talking the moment the rope went tight. Andrew preached for 2 days from his own execution. I want to pause here for one moment, because if this is hitting you the way it is hitting me, there is something simple you can do. If you are finding meaning in this, take 1 second to subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need them. And down in the comments, I want you to do something specific. Tell me which apostle so far has surprised you the most. Was it the son of thunder kissing his executioner? Was it the coward who chose to die upside down? Drop a name. I read them. Now let us keep going, because we are leaving Rome and Greece behind, and the road is about to get long and strange. Because here's something most people genuinely do not know. The apostles did not stay in Jerusalem. They did not huddle together in one safe city. They scattered to the ends of the earth, and I mean the literal ends of the earth as they understood it. One of them went farther than all the rest, farther than anyone would have believed possible. His name was Thomas. And I need to defend Thomas for a second, because we've been unfair to him for 2,000 years. We call him Doubting Thomas. We turned his name into an insult. And it all comes from one moment, and after the resurrection, when the other disciples told Thomas they had seen Jesus alive. And Thomas, who was not in the room, said the most honest thing a grieving man can say. He said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Unless I touch the wounds myself, I cannot believe my best friend is alive again." Is that doubt? Or is that a man who loved Jesus so much that he could not survive a second round of false hope? A week later, Jesus appeared again. And this time Thomas was there. And Jesus did not scold him. Jesus walked straight up to him and said, "Here, put your finger here. Touch the wounds." And Thomas, the doubter, fell to his knees and said 5 words that no one else in the Gospels says so plainly: "My Lord and my God." The so-called doubter gave us the clearest confession of who Jesus is in the entire New Testament. And then watch where that man goes. The tradition of the Christians of India, and this is an ancient living tradition held by millions of people in Kerala to this very day, who still call themselves the St. Thomas Christians, says that Thomas got on a ship and sailed all the way to India, to the other side of the known world, alone, to a culture that did not speak his language, did not share his scriptures, did not worship his God. The doubter walked off the edge of the map, and near the city we now call Chennai, the tradition says Thomas was run through with a spear and died on a hill that still bears his name. The man who needed to touch the wounds to believe ended his life with a spear opening a wound in his own side. There is a terrible symmetry in that. He believed because of a pierced side. He died of one. Now watch what happens next, because we are about to reach the death that artists have never been able to forget. His name was Bartholomew. In the Gospel of John, he is probably the man called Nathanael, the one Jesus saw under a fig tree before they had ever met, the one Jesus said had no deceit in him at all, a man with nothing fake about him. Tradition carried Bartholomew far to the east, into Armenia, where the old accounts say he led the king himself to faith. And that is exactly the kind of success that gets you killed. Because when a king converts, the priests of the old gods lose everything. I am going to tell you how the tradition says Bartholomew died, and I'm going to say it plainly, because softening it would be a lie. The accounts say he was flayed alive. They skinned him, and then they beheaded him. For centuries, painters and sculptors couldn't leave that image alone. In the Sistine Chapel In Michelangelo's painting of the Final Judgment, there is a figure holding his own skin in his hand. That is Bartholomew, remembered by the worst thing that was ever done to him, and the man with no deceit in him. The man Jesus called completely genuine was genuine all the way to the end. He did not pretend the pain away. He did not pretend his faith away either. Stop and feel the weight of what we are walking through. We started with a sword, then a fire, then a cross, then ropes, then a spear, now knives. The methods are escalating. The empire is getting more creative in its cruelty. And not one of these men, not one, has said the words that would make it stop. Let me slow down for 2 more of them, because honesty matters, and so does the human being behind each name. There was Philip. You have heard his voice in the Gospels, even if you do not remember his name. Philip is the one who, at the Last Supper, on the most solemn night of all, leaned in and said the thing every one of us has secretly wanted to say to God. Lord, just show us the Father. Show us the Father. And that will be enough for us. Stop asking us to believe what we cannot see. Just let us see it once, and we will never doubt again. And Jesus, with what must have been a kind of ache in his voice, answered, Have I been with you so long? And you still do not know me, Philip? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Philip wanted proof he could put his eyes on. And the tradition says that he spent the rest of his life giving other people exactly that, pointing them to the face of God in Jesus, until, in the city of Hierapolis, in what is now Turkey, the old accounts say he was put to death for it, hung or crucified, by some accounts upside down like Peter, with his preaching never stopping until his breath did. The man who begged to see the Father got, at the end, to go and see him. And there was Matthew. Now you need to understand what Matthew was, because the Gospels do not soften it. Matthew was a tax collector. In that world, that was not a respectable career. It was treason with a salary. Tax collectors were Jews who worked for the Roman occupiers, squeezing their own people for money and skimming whatever they could off the top. They were considered traitors and thieves, banned from the synagogue, lumped in with the worst of society. And one ordinary day, this collaborator is sitting at his collection booth, counting other people's money, when a rabbi walks past and says 2 words, "Follow me." And Matthew, the traitor, the outcast, the man with his hands in everyone's pockets, stands up, walks away from the most lucrative position in town, and never goes back. He then writes the very first gospel, the account of Jesus that opens your New Testament. The thief became the witness. The tradition scatters his death across Ethiopia and Persia, with most accounts agreeing he was martyred for the faith, though the exact manner is honestly lost to us. But the shape of his life is the loudest sermon of all. The man whose whole life had been about taking from people spent the rest of it giving them the only thing that mattered. Here's the part nobody tells you about that group of 12. Look at who Jesus put in the same room. A tax collector who served Rome. And, as you're about to see, a revolutionary who wanted to kill men like him. Honest fisherman and a man who handled dirty money. It should never have held together for a week. It held together for the rest of their lives, and to the death. But there is one more James you have to meet, and his death is anchored in the hardest kind of historical evidence there is, the testimony of an enemy. There were several men named James in the early church. We met James the son of thunder, beheaded by Herod. There was James the son of Alphaeus, one of the 12. And there was James known as the brother of Jesus, the one who, astonishingly, didn't believe in Jesus during his lifetime, who thought his own brother had lost his mind, and who only became a believer after he saw the risen Christ. That James became the leader of the entire church in Jerusalem, and his death is recorded not by a Christian trying to make a point, but by Josephus, a Jewish historian writing for a Roman audience, a man with no reason on earth to flatter the Christians. Josephus tells us that around the year 62, a high priest named Ananus seized James during a gap in Roman authority, hauled him before a court, and had him executed. Other early accounts add the detail that they threw James from the height of the temple, and when the fall did not kill him, they clubbed him to death where he lay. And the tradition says that as he died, broken at the bottom of the temple wall, James was praying for the very people who were killing him. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The same words his brother had prayed from the cross. The brother who once thought Jesus was insane died quoting him. We are deep into this now, and I do not want you to miss what is happening. So let me say it directly. If these stories are doing something in you, if you are feeling the weight of men who would not break, then share this with one person. Just one. Somebody in your life who is being pressured right now to take back something they know is true. Send it to them. Sometimes the only thing a person under pressure needs is to know that someone else, somewhere, held the line. All right, we have 2 figures left in this far-flung company, and then we reach the island. 2 of the 12 are almost always remembered together, because tradition says they traveled together and died together. Simon, called the Zealot, and that title tells you everything. The Zealots were the radicals, the revolutionaries, the men who wanted to drive Rome out of Israel by the sword. Jesus took a violent revolutionary and put him in the same group as Matthew, a man who had collaborated with Rome and collected its taxes. A tax collector and a man who wanted to kill tax collectors in the same band of brothers. That alone should tell you something supernatural was holding these men together. And then there was Jude, also called Thaddeus, the apostle who, at the Last Supper, asked Jesus the question so many of us have asked in the dark. Lord, why are you going to reveal yourself to us and not to the whole world? Why not just show everyone plainly and end all the doubt? It is the question of every honest believer who has ever wondered why God does not simply make himself undeniable. Jude asked it to Jesus' face. Tradition says Simon and Jude carried the message east into Persia and Mesopotamia, and that they were martyred there together. The accounts vary. Some say Simon was sawn apart. Some say both were killed with axes or clubs by the priests of the old religion. They had come to challenge. The details are uncertain, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the shape of it is the same as all the others. 2 men far from home, far from safety, in a hostile land, with every earthly reason to stay quiet. And they would not stay quiet. And that brings us at last toward the island. But there is one more man we cannot walk past. a man who was not one of the original 12 at all, and who may be the most unlikely name in the entire story. His name was Paul, and the first time he appears in the Bible, he is on the wrong side. When the very first Christian martyr, a man named Stephen, was being stoned to death by a mob, there was a young, zealous, hard-eyed man standing off to the side, guarding the coats of the men throwing the rocks, approving of every stone. That man was named Saul. He went on to become the most feared persecutor of Christians alive, dragging believers out of their homes, throwing them in prison, hunting them from city to city. He was on the road to Damascus to arrest more of them, when a light knocked him to the ground, and a voice he did not recognize asked him why he was attacking it. And the persecutor became the preacher. Saul became Paul. The man who guarded the coats at a martyrdom became the man who would write almost half of your New Testament from inside a prison cell. And it ended where so much of this ends. Rome, Nero. Paul had been arrested and brought to the capital, and because he was a Roman citizen by birth, he had a privilege the others did not. He could not be crucified. Citizens were granted a faster death. So the tradition, anchored by the early writer Clement of Rome and the historian Eusebius, says Paul was beheaded by the sword on a road outside the city. But here is what makes Paul's death different from all the others. We have his own words from near the end, written to a young man named Timothy, while Paul sat in chains, waiting to die. He did not write in fear. He wrote like a man crossing a finish line. I have fought the good fight, he said. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. The man who had once held the coats at an execution walked calmly to his own, certain he had run the whole way home. And now at last, the island. You have been waiting for him even if you did not know it. Because at the very beginning I told you there was one death in this story that is not really a death at all. One man who outlived every single one of his friends. One man who was the last witness left alive. His name was John, the youngest of them, the son of Thunder's little brother, the one the Gospels call the disciple Jesus loved, the only one of the 12 who did not run all the way, the only one the accounts place at the foot of the cross, standing there while the others hid, close enough that Jesus, dying, looked down and gave John the responsibility of caring for his mother. John was there for the worst of it. He watched his best friend suffocate to death on a Roman cross. He was the one who would not look away. And here is the strange and beautiful thing. After watching all of that, after the cross, after the empty tomb, after decades of preaching in a world that was crucifying his friends one by one, John would not die. The early writer Tertullian preserves a tradition that the Romans tried to execute John in Rome by throwing him into a cauldron of boiling oil, and that John came out of it alive and unharmed. Whether that detail is literal history or treasured memory, here's what we can say with more confidence on the authority of the historian Eusebius. When John was an old man under the Emperor Domitian, he was not killed. He was exiled, banished to a small, barren volcanic island in the Aegean Sea, a place of rock and sun and salt and silence. The island was called Patmos. It was where Rome sent people to be forgotten. Picture it. An old man, the last one. Every friend he'd ever made in the cause was dead. James, his own brother, beheaded 40 years ago. Peter, crucified upside down. Andrew on the X-shaped cross, Thomas speared in India, Bartholomew flayed in Armenia, James the Just thrown from the temple, all of them gone. And here is John, alone, an old man on a rock in the middle of the sea, exiled, abandoned, the only voice left who could still say, I was there. I saw him die. I saw him alive again. I am a witness. Marty's the last one breathing. And it is there, on that black volcanic rock, exactly where we said we would end, that the most powerful thing in this entire story happens. John tells us that one day on that island, he heard a voice behind him like a trumpet. He turned and he saw a figure so overwhelming, so radiant and terrible that John, the disciple Jesus loved, the one who had leaned on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, the only one brave enough to stand at the cross, fell down at his feet like a dead man. The boldest of them all, on the ground, undone. And then the figure reached down and touched him and said two words John had heard once before, decades ago, from a face he knew. Fear not, fear not. I am the first and the last. I am he that lives and was dead. And behold, I am alive forever. Do you see it now? Do you see why John could not die a martyr's death like all the others? Because John's whole life had become the proof. He did not need to die to be a witness. He had outlived the entire empire's attempt to silence him. They beheaded his brother. They crucified his friends. They skinned them and speared them and burned them. And they could not stop the message because the witness simply would not go away. John lived to be an old man and died, the tradition says, peacefully in the city of Ephesus. The only one of the 12 to die in his bed. The last man standing. The one who watched it all, from the cross to the island, and never once took it back. Now I want to bring this all the way home to you, to your actual life. Tonight, here's the question that the deaths of these 12 men force on every single one of us. Why did they do it? And I do not mean that as a pious question. I mean it as the hardest, coldest, most practical question you can ask. Why would 12 ordinary men, not philosophers, not fanatics with something to gain, but fishermen and tax collectors, why would they let themselves be crucified and speared and skinned and beheaded and clubbed when every one of them could have walked free with a single sentence? Because here is what you need to understand about human beings, and you already know this, because you are one. People will die for what they believe is true. History is full of people who died for a cause, for a country, for a faith they were taught. That proves nothing about whether the faith is true, only that they believed it. But that is not what we are looking at here. The apostles were not in a position to merely believe the resurrection. They were in a position to know whether it was true or false. Either they saw Jesus alive after his death, they touched him, ate with him, watched him, or they did not. There is no third option for them. They were not believing a story someone told them. They were either telling the truth about what they personally saw with their own eyes, or they were lying about it. And here's the thing that should land on your chest like a stone. I want you to do something uncomfortable with me for a moment. Stop thinking about them and start thinking about you. Put yourself in the room, the real room. There is a table in front of you, and on that table is everything they will use if you do not cooperate. The men in the room are not in a hurry. They have done this many times. And they explain it to you simply, almost gently, the way the Romans actually did. We do not want to hurt you. We are reasonable people. All you have to do is say one sentence. Say it was a lie. Say you never saw him alive. Say the name is nothing to you. 3 words. I take it back. And you stand up, you walk out that door, you go home, and tonight you sleep in your own bed next to the people you love. Be honest with yourself right now, because no one else can hear you. Is there a price? Is there a level of pain, a threat to your children, a death slow enough that would get those 3 words out of you? Most of us in the dark have to admit that there is. Everyone has a line. Everyone has a sentence they would say to make it stop. You know your own well enough to be afraid of it. That is what makes these 11 men impossible to explain away. Whatever your line is, they had one too. They were not made of different material than you are. Peter proved that in front of a teenage servant girl, with no torture at all, just the fear of being seen. And yet when the real table came, with the real instruments in city after city, year after year, across an empire that had perfected the art of making people say anything, the line held every time. The fisherman did not break. The tax collector did not break. The doubter did not break. 11 men in 11 rooms, with 11 deaths laid out in front of them, and every one of them looked at the open door and the easy sentence and chose the table instead. People do not get themselves tortured to death to protect a lie they made up. You might die for something false that you sincerely believe. No one dies horribly, one after another, in country after country, decade after decade, to defend something they know for a fact they invented. If the resurrection was a hoax the disciples cooked up, then at least one of these men, under the threat of being flayed alive, of having ropes tighten on a cross for 2 days, of watching the sword come down, at least one of them would have cracked. The way Peter cracked in front of a servant girl, all it would have taken was one man in one moment of agony saying, "Stop. It was a lie. We stole the body. I take it all back." Not one of them ever did. So let me give you the 3 things to carry out of this. The first is simply the fact, and you can take it to a historian and check it. The earliest leaders of the Christian movement died for claiming they had seen Jesus alive again, and they died in scattered places, under different rulers, with every chance to recant. And the consistency of their refusal is one of the strongest pieces of historical evidence that something genuinely happened on that first Easter morning. You do not have to believe it, but you cannot honestly call it nothing. The second is for you personally, right where you are sitting. You have a servant girl moment in your life. We all do. A place where it is easier to deny what you know is true than to stand there and say it out loud. A conversation you avoid. A faith you keep quiet at work. A conviction you soften when the room turns cold. Peter had that moment too, and he failed it badly on the worst night of his life. And it didn't disqualify him. The man who denied Christ to a girl by a fire went on to refuse to deny him to the emperor of the world. Your failure last week is not your final word. You can stop running. The same men who fled in the dark stopped running. So can you. And the third, the one I want to leave ringing in your ears as you go to sleep tonight. Every one of these men was given a way out, a sentence, a few words that would have ended the pain and sent them home. And the reason none of them said those words is not that they were braver than you. They were not. They were cowards once, in a garden in the dark, just like the rest of us. The reason is that they had seen something. They had seen a man die, and then seen that same man alive again. And once you have truly seen that, death loses its grip on you. You cannot threaten a man with death when he has already watched death lose. That is what turned 12 runners into 12 men who would not run. Not courage, not willpower. A face. A voice that came back from the grave and said the same two words to the first of them and the last of them and every terrified human being in between. Fear not. So let me leave you with a question I actually want you to answer. Down in the comments, before you close this. Out of all 12, Peter upside down, Andrew preaching from the ropes, Thomas with the spear, Bartholomew with the knives, James kissing his executioner, John alone on his island. Which one reached you tonight? Which death will you still be thinking about tomorrow? Tell me. I read every one. They all ran once, every single one of them. And then they stopped. And the only thing big enough to make a coward stop running forever is the truth. Take it back, the empire said. And for 2,000 years, the answer has not changed. No,